CreepyCorner stories.
Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? I bought a child from the dark web. He ended up inside my wife. Alright, so before I even start, let me just say, I know how this sounds. I know it sounds like one of those I found a haunted doll on eBay type stories. But I swear to you, this is real. And if you don't believe me, I really don't care. This happened a year ago, and I still have no idea how to explain it. I've told my closest friends, even tried to tell my mom, but every time I do, I get the same reaction. A mix of, "Are you insane?" and "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." But I don't care. I need to get this out there. So, let me start from the beginning. At the time, I was deep into weird internet rabbit holes. Not just your usual creepy stories on YouTube or watching a video of a cursed voicemail. I'm talking real underground internet. The kind of stuff where you need to be invited into forums, where people talk in code, and if you ask the wrong questions, you just disappear from the site. I never really did anything crazy on there, mostly just lurked. But one night, after having a little too much to drink, I ended up on this one site. It didn't have a name, just a blank black screen with the blinking cursor. Then, text appeared. "What are you looking for?" At first, I thought it was some kind of chatbot, so I typed, "Something interesting." The screen glitched for a second. Then more text appeared. "Are you willing to pay?" I laughed, figuring it was some kind of scam, but my curiosity got the best of me. So I typed, "Depends. What are you selling?" I expected a list of drugs, fake passports, maybe even weapons. Instead, what I got was unsettling. A single word appeared. "Children." I sat there staring at my screen, feeling my stomach drop. I wasn't some kind of psycho. I would never buy a child. But at the same time, part of me thought it had to be fake. Some troll trying to freak people out. So I kept going. I typed, "How much?" Immediately, a list of numbers popped up. No names, no ages, just different price ranges. Some were ridiculously high, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Others, not so much. There was one listing that stood out to me, mostly because of how cheap it was. $3,500 underneath it, in tiny gray text, was a note. One of a kind, unique experience, guaranteed. Now, listen, I was drunk, okay? I wasn't thinking straight. I still thought this was some kind of joke, or maybe one of those dark web mystery box things people post about on YouTube. I had some money saved up from crypto investments, and I figured if this was fake, I could just charge it back on my card. So, like an idiot, I bought it. The site asked for my address. I put in an old P.O. box I hadn't used in years. No way was I giving them my real house. Then, just like that, the transaction was confirmed. No email, no tracking number, just a single message that said, "It's inside now." I stared at the screen, confused. What's inside? That's when my wife called my name from the bedroom. Her voice sounded weird, strained, like she was trying to talk, but something was stopping her. I ran to check on her, and that's when I saw her. She was standing in the doorway of our bathroom, holding her stomach. Her skin was pale, almost gray. She looked sick. "Babe," I said, stepping forward. "What's wrong?" She opened her mouth to speak, but instead of words, a small wet hand pushed its way out of her throat. And then I heard it, a child's laughter, coming from inside her. She stood there, frozen. Her eyes rolled so far back in her skull that only the whites were visible. Her mouth was stretched open too wide, her lips cracking at the edges like dry paper, and from inside her throat, something moved. I saw it. A tiny wrinkled hand, pale, almost translucent, was forcing its way out from deep inside her, gripping the edge of her teeth as if using them to pull itself free. And the worst part? It was laughing. Not in the way a normal kid would, but wet, distorted, wrong, like a child pretending to be happy while choking on something. The sound gurgled up from inside her, thick and unnatural, mixing with her gasping breaths. I stood there paralyzed, my body refusing to move. "Babe?" My voice cracked, my hands trembling at my sides. "What the What's happening? Talk to me." But she couldn't. She was retching, her chest heaving violently as whatever was inside her pushed. Her stomach bulged outward, something shifting under the skin, like a rat crawling through a plastic bag. She let out a strangled scream, muffled by the tiny hand that shoved itself deeper into her mouth, pressing down on her tongue. I ran forward, grabbing her by the shoulders, but the second my hands touched her, she collapsed. Her body hit the floor hard, twitching, convulsing like she was having a seizure. Her fingers dug into her own stomach, nails tearing through her nightshirt, as if trying to rip something out. I backed away, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my mind screaming at me to wake up, this isn't real. But it was, because right then, as I stared, her stomach ripped open. No knife, no weapon, just skin splitting apart on its own, like a zipper being pulled from the inside. And from the gaping wound, a face emerged, a child's face. But it wasn't normal. Its skin was paper-thin, bluish-gray, veins crawling like spiderwebs beneath the surface. Its eyes, God, its eyes were too large for its skull, bulging outward like a dead fish left in the sun. It had no lips, just teeth, rows of them, tiny, needle-like, jutting out in all directions like broken glass. And it was smiling. It crawled out of her, dragging itself forward with its tiny skeletal hands, its body slick with dark, thick, black fluid that wasn't blood. It smelled sweet, like rotting fruit, and as it moved, I saw that it had no legs, just a writhing mass of tendons and nerves that squirmed like a bundle of worms. My wife's body was still shaking, her chest rising and falling in sharp, broken gasps, but she wasn't screaming anymore. She was laughing, the same gurgling, childlike giggle that had been coming from inside her before. And then, the thing looked at me. It tilted its head, twitching like a glitching video, and whispered in a voice that wasn't human, "You paid for me." My stomach turned to ice. I scrambled backward, my hand slipping in the black fluid pooling beneath my wife's body. The thing crawled closer, its tiny hands gripping my ankle with unnatural strength. "You wanted me, right?" It giggled. "You bought me, so now I'm yours." I kicked at it, my heel slamming into its face, but it didn't react. It just kept smiling, its jaw unhinging slightly, revealing more teeth, deeper inside its throat. I did the only thing I could. I ran. I sprinted out of the bedroom, my vision blurring, my heart slamming against my ribs. I barely made it down the hall before I heard a wet, slapping sound behind me. It was following, not running, not walking, just crawling, dragging itself forward with those horrible bony hands, moving way too fast for something without legs. I grabbed my phone off the counter, my hand shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I didn't even think. I just called 911. It rang, and then, click, a voice answered. But it wasn't a dispatcher. It was the same voice as the thing in the hallway. "You called for help," it whispered, "but I already came." My blood turned to ice. Slowly, I turned my head. It was right there. Its face was inches from mine, its breath cold and damp against my skin. And before I could even scream, it shoved itself down my throat. Have you ever drowned before? Not the kind where you get caught under the waves for a few seconds and come up coughing. I mean real drowning. The kind where your lungs lock up before you can even take a breath, where your throat closes in on itself and the world starts fading into a dark, pulsing tunnel. That's what it felt like, except instead of water, it was flesh. Cold, writhing, living flesh. The thing shoved itself down my throat, its body folding in on itself like some kind of boneless animal, forcing its way past my teeth. My jaw dislocated instantly, a wet pop echoing through my skull as my mouth stretched farther than humanly possible. I could feel it pulsing as it slid deeper, its skin smooth and clammy, like something born without a mother. I tried to scream, but the moment I did, it forced itself further, its tiny skeletal hands gripping the sides of my tongue, using them to drag itself down faster. My throat bulged outward, my skin splitting in tiny webbed cracks, but it didn't stop. It was never going to stop. I clawed at my own neck, fingers digging so deep into my skin that I felt warm blood slick under my nails. But it was too late. It was inside me now. I hit the floor, body spasming violently, my limbs locking up as something unfamiliar slithered through my insides. My chest was tight, my ribs creaking, as though something was coiling between them, curling into my lungs, filling every space inside of me. I could feel my stomach stretch, feel my insides shift and split as the thing burrowed deeper. And then, for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something else. I felt it move its mouth, inside me. It sighed, like someone settling into a warm bath. Then, in a soft, gentle voice, it whispered, "Now, we're one." And I blacked out. I don't know how long I was gone. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. But when I woke up, everything was still. Too still. The house was dark, the only light coming from my phone screen, still sitting where I dropped it. The call was still connected, and on the other end of the line, I could hear it. Soft, slow breathing. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. I just listened. Then, in a voice that was no longer mine, I heard myself whisper, "She's waiting for you in the bedroom." I threw the phone across the room. I felt wrong, heavy, like I wasn't in my own body anymore, like I was wearing my own skin as a costume. My arms felt longer, my fingers too thin, bending in ways they weren't supposed to. I could feel something stirring inside me, something alive, curling around my ribs like a second spine. And then I realized I wasn't breathing anymore. Not normally, at least. It was breathing for me. I stood up, unsteady, my body moving like a badly controlled puppet. My legs felt too weak, my knees threatening to collapse under me, but something inside me held me up, guided me forward toward the bedroom. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The room was colder than before, the air thick, like it had been sealed off from the rest of the house for years. My wife was still there, but she wasn't alone. She was sitting up in bed, her head tilted at a wrong angle, her eyes open but empty. And sitting beside her, curled up like a child in a womb, was another version of her. Only, it wasn't her. It was smaller, its skin pale and waxy, its eyes sealed shut, like it had never been meant to see. It was breathing, its tiny chest rising and falling too quickly, like a baby taking its first panicked breaths outside the womb. And then it opened its mouth, not to speak, not to cry, to scream. But it wasn't human. It was my wife's voice, but distorted, stretched out into a gurgling wet shriek that shook the walls, cracked the glass on the nightstand, made my eardrums feel like they were about to split open. I stumbled back, my hands clamping over my ears, but the noise didn't stop. It just kept growing, getting louder, deeper, heavier, until it felt like the whole house was vibrating. Then, silence. And when I looked up, she was gone. My wife. The thing in the bed. All of it. The sheets were untouched, like no one had ever been there. The black, thick fluid that had been on the floor before vanished. The walls, the nightstand, the shattered glass, all clean, like nothing had ever happened. I felt something shift inside me, something awake. I ran to the mirror, and for the first time, I saw it. It was in my reflection, not like a shadow, not like a hallucination. It was behind my eyes, watching me, smiling, and then, slowly, it blinked. I didn't, but it did, and in that moment, I realized something horrifying. I hadn't bought a child. I'd been bought, and I was no longer alone. Do you know what it feels like to not own your body anymore? To wake up and feel like your limbs aren't yours, like something is pulling the strings from underneath your skin, making you move, making you breathe, making you function, but you're just along for the ride. That's what I woke up to. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't even remember leaving the bedroom. But when my eyes opened, I was outside. It was night, but the sky was wrong. The stars were too bright, too close, like tiny eyes watching from above. The air smelled like static, like that burned metal scent when you leave old batteries in a drawer for too long. My feet were bare, pressed against something cold and wet, but I wasn't on grass or pavement. I was standing on skin, not human, not exactly. It was grayish, slightly translucent, pulsing underneath me like a giant living organ. I could see veins crawling in deep, sickly blue rivers, disappearing into infinite blackness below. The surface was wet, not with water, but with something thicker, something alive, like whatever I was standing on was sweating me out. I tried to move, but my body didn't respond. I wasn't in control anymore. My arms moved on their own, my fingers twitching unnaturally, curling backward until they snapped. The pain was instant, hot and electric, but I didn't react. I didn't even flinch. Something inside me was overriding it. Then, a voice whispered inside my head, "You don't need those anymore." And before I could react, I felt my skin tear open. It started at my wrists, slowly peeling apart like wet tissue, exposing the red, stringy sinew underneath. There was no blood, just black, tar-like threads squirming beneath my skin, like living stitches. They tightened, pulling me upright, forcing me forward like a marionette. I wasn't walking. I was being moved. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, an ocean of living flesh, throbbing, breathing, shifting like it was dreaming with me inside it. And in the distance, something was waiting for me. A door. Not just any door. My door. It stood alone, unnatural against the pulsing landscape. The same wood, the same chipped paint, the same handle I touched every day when I left for work. But it was wrong, because it was breathing. The doorframe expanded and contracted, inhaling, as if it was trying to suck me in. The handle was no longer metal. It was bone, shaped into a delicate, grinning hand, the fingers outstretched, waiting for me to take hold. I didn't want to. I didn't want any of this, but I had no choice. Something inside me yanked my arm forward, my half-broken fingers wrapping around the handle before I could even think to resist. And the second I touched it, I wasn't there anymore. I woke up in my house. Same walls, same furniture, same smell of burnt coffee lingering from the morning before. But something was off. The air felt thick, like I was breathing through lungs that weren't my own. My vision was too sharp, like I was looking through someone else's eyes. And the worst part, I could still feel it inside me, not just in my body, in my thoughts. It wasn't speaking anymore, not in words, but I could feel it watching, feel it digging through my memories, stretching its fingers through my childhood, my regrets, my fears. It was learning me, adapting to me. I stepped forward, but my movements were wrong. My arms swung too loosely. My legs moved like they were too long for my bones. It was like trying to control a body that was already being used by something else. And then I heard my wife's voice. "Babe?" I turned toward the bedroom door. She was standing there, wrapped in one of my old hoodies, her hair a mess, eyes still filled with sleep. She looked normal. For a moment, I almost thought it had all been a nightmare. But then her eyes drifted down to my hands, and I watched as her face changed. Her sleepy expression twisted into something horrified, her breath catching in her throat as she staggered back. What happened to you?" I looked down. My fingers were still snapped backward, some barely hanging on by strands of wet muscle, but there was no blood. Instead, something dark and thin had replaced my tendons, moving on its own, like tiny, hungry insects squirming inside me. I opened my mouth to speak, but it wasn't my voice that came out. It was hers, my wife's voice, perfectly copied. "I'm fine," I said, but it wasn't me. Her own voice echoed back at her, the tone flawless, the rhythm exactly the same. And the way she looked at me, that moment will haunt me forever, because she knew I wasn't me anymore. And before she could run, before she could scream, something inside me lunged forward. I had no control over it. My hand snapped out, grabbing her face, fingers sinking into the soft flesh of her cheeks, her jaw, her throat. She gasped, her breath hitching, her arms flailing as she tried to pull away. But the threads inside me reacted instantly, wrapping around her like roots sinking into fresh soil. I tried to stop it. I tried to let go. But I wasn't driving anymore. I was just trapped in the passenger seat of my own body, forced to watch as the thing inside me took its time, savoring her fear, letting her struggle. And then, in a soft whisper, using her own voice, it spoke. "I think I'll wear this one next," she screamed. And then, everything went black. I woke up inside my wife's body. I felt her lungs stretch as I inhaled. I felt her fingers twitch as I tried to move. I felt her heart hammering inside her chest, not from fear, but from me. I was her now. And the worst part? I could still see myself standing in front of me. My old body. It was staring at me, head tilted too far to the side, its broken fingers still curled like it had been clutching something that wasn't there anymore. Then, it smiled. Not a normal smile. Something wider, stretched, unhinged. The corners of its mouth pulled all the way to its ears, revealing too many teeth, layered deep into its throat, like something that had never been meant to eat food. Only flesh. It didn't speak. It didn't have to. Because I already knew what it was thinking. It had taken me, and now it was going to keep going. I tried to scream, but my voice, her voice, came out wrong. Choked. Wet. Like I was still suffocating on the thing inside me. My old body stepped forward, the bones in its ankles cracking loudly with each movement. Its arms twitched, moving in sudden, jerky spasms, like a spider trying to figure out how to use a human's limbs. And then, it turned and walked away. It left the house, left me behind. And just like that, I was alone. It took days before I could move again. I don't know how long I sat there, trapped in my wife's body, my limbs heavy, my breath coming in slow, automatic pulses. I could hear everything, cars outside, the hum of the refrigerator, the clock ticking endlessly on the wall. But I couldn't do anything. I was just stuck inside her. Eventually, my body, the body that wasn't mine, began to respond. I could lift her hands, move her legs, but it didn't feel real. It felt like wearing a mask made of wet, rotting skin, like my body was something I had killed and climbed into. But I wasn't dead. She was. I realized that when I finally stumbled into the bathroom, the mirror reflected her face, but the eyes staring back weren't hers. They were mine. It was like I had been shoved into her skin, the same way that thing had forced its way into me. I had been ripped out and stuffed inside her, like I was nothing but a thing to be worn. And my old body, the one that wasn't me anymore, was out there somewhere, walking around with my face. I tried to live normally after that. I had no choice. It was either adapt or lose my mind completely. I went to work. I smiled at people in the grocery store. I answered texts from my wife's friends, pretending everything was fine. But nothing was fine, because the longer I stayed in her skin, the less I felt like myself. My thoughts started changing. Memories that weren't mine started appearing in my head. I remembered things I had never experienced. Childhood birthday parties, nights spent crying into a pillow, the feeling of my father's arms around me. I started forgetting my own name. And the worst part, I started forgetting what my own face looked like. I would try to picture myself, but all I could see was her. Until one day, I woke up, and I didn't remember being anyone else at all. I tried to track down my old body. I had to know what it was doing, what it was wearing now. So I started searching, following strange news reports, watching security footage online, and eventually, I found it. Or rather, I found what it had become. It had moved far away, different state, different name, but I still recognized it instantly. The way it stood too still, the way its hands twitched slightly when it wasn't moving. It had been wearing me for a while, but it had moved on. It had taken another skin. I saw it walking into a Starbucks, its features shifting subtly, as if trying to mold itself into the person it had just become. It wasn't me anymore. It was someone else now. And that's when I understood. It wasn't going to stop. It was going to keep going, moving from person to person, wearing them like suits, using their lives, their bodies, until it got bored. Then it would shed them. and take another. I haven't told anyone this story before, because even now, after everything, I don't know if I'm real anymore. Maybe I was never real to begin with. Maybe I was just a husk waiting to be used. Maybe you are too. And maybe, just maybe, it's already looking at you, waiting for you to buy something you shouldn't have. And when you do, it's going to wear you next. I ended up on the Antarctica in a hidden prison cell, trying to expose a secret government project about time traveling. My roommate was Skinwalker. Alright, so before I even start, let me just say, I know how this sounds. I wouldn't believe me either. If I heard the story from someone else, I'd assume they were off their meds or trying to farm internet clout. But this happened, and I have no proof, no photos, no recordings, because by the time I realized what was happening, I was too deep, too screwed. It all started because of a stupid Reddit post. I was scrolling r/conspiracy when I saw this thread about a government facility in Antarctica that supposedly didn't exist on any official maps. The OP claimed it was connected to some insane time travel experiments, and that every scientist who ever worked there had disappeared. Classic internet nonsense, right? The post was filled with screenshots from the dark web, links to encrypted files, and a bunch of coordinates that led to pure ice wasteland. But there was this one comment that stood out. It was from a throwaway account, just a bunch of random numbers and letters. It said, "If you're serious, start at McMurdo Station. You'll find what you're looking for under the Red Tower. Be careful. They already know you're reading this." I swear to God, the second I read that, my Wi-Fi cut out. Not just my laptop, my phone, my TV, my PlayStation, everything. I thought it was just a storm messing with the signal, but when I checked my router, all the settings had been reset to factory mode, like someone had remotely wiped it. That should have been my first sign to stop, but I didn't. Instead, I did the dumbest thing imaginable. I went deeper. At first, I didn't take it too seriously. I mean, I wasn't about to book a flight to Antarctica based on some Reddit thread, but I did start researching, digging through old government files, looking up McMurdo Station, cross-checking flight records, and then I found something weird. There were supply shipments going to McMurdo that didn't make sense. Huge orders of food and medical supplies, more than what should have been needed for a research base. And there were passenger lists of people who flew in, but no records of them flying out, ever. Then, one night, while I was watching YouTube in bed, I got a text from an unknown number. "Stop looking. You won't like what you find." I ignored it. The next day, my bank account was frozen. The day after that, I woke up to find my front door wide open, even though I lived alone and I always locked it. At this point, I should have been terrified. But honestly, I was hooked. Someone really didn't want me looking into this, which meant whatever was happening in Antarctica was real. So, like an absolute idiot, I took the next step. I found a guy on the deep web who specialized in getting people to off-limits places. He went by the name Dante. Dude had a 5-star rating, which is wild for a guy who essentially commits high-level felonies for a living. I paid him in Bitcoin, and 2 days later, I had a fake research ID, a plane ticket to Chile, and a very simple set of instructions. Don't talk to anyone. When you land, go to the second Starbucks on Arturo Merino Benitez Airport. ask for a special order. If they give you a red cup, you're good. If they give you a blue cup, leave immediately. At this point, I wasn't scared. I was excited. I had no idea I was walking into hell. So I get to Chile. The flight is normal. No weird vibes. The airport is busy, and I make my way to the Starbucks like it's just another Tuesday. I go up to the counter, heart pounding, and ask for a special order. The barista doesn't even blink. She just reaches under the counter and hands me a red cup. Game on. I sit down at a corner table and sip my coffee, trying to act normal. About 5 minutes later, this bald guy in a military jacket sits across from me. No greeting, no handshake. He just looks at me and says, "You have 5 seconds to change your mind." I don't. He nods, hands me a folder with a boarding pass and a thick packet of documents. Memorize everything, destroy it after. Then he's gone. I open the folder. Inside is a new identity. Dr. Marcus Lee, research specialist in cryogenic sciences, and my flight, a direct military transport to Antarctica. At this point, my stomach is doing backflips. This isn't some tourist flight. This is a government-controlled aircraft going straight to the most locked down place on Earth. I should have bailed, should have walked away. Instead, I burned the documents in the Starbucks bathroom, walked out, and got on the plane. That was the last normal decision I ever made. Next stop, McMurdo Station. But McMurdo was just the beginning. Because what I found underneath it, that's where the story gets really messed up. The moment the plane touched down on the icy wasteland of Antarctica, I knew I had made a mistake. The windows had been blacked out for most of the flight, but when they finally let us see outside, all I saw was an ocean of white, stretching infinitely in every direction. No signs of life, no landmarks, just pure, empty nothingness. And then, out of nowhere, a stark black building emerged from the snow, like a wound in the earth. McMurdo Station. It looked smaller than I expected, almost like a decoy, as if the real base was hidden somewhere else. The second I stepped onto the ice, the cold hit me like a gunshot. The kind of cold that gnaws at your bones, makes your eyes water instantly. I could barely breathe. The wind screamed through the open landscape, carrying something with it. Some faint, inhuman howling that made my skin crawl. No one else seemed to notice. I was escorted inside by 2 men in unmarked military uniforms. No names, no conversation. Just a simple order. Follow. Don't ask questions. Inside, the station felt wrong. It wasn't like the research bases I had seen in documentaries. The air smelled sterile, like chemicals. The halls were lined with security cameras that moved, tracking me in real time. But the worst part, the people. There weren't that many, maybe a dozen or so visible, but something was off about them. Their faces were too pale, their eyes too wide. Their movements were slow, almost mechanical, like they were trying too hard to act human. One woman stared at me as I passed. She didn't blink, not once. I made it to my assigned bunk, a metal-framed bed in a cramped room with a single overhead light that flickered non-stop. The walls were covered in scratches, not random ones, words, etched into the metal with something sharp. Some were numbers, coordinates, but one phrase was repeated over and over, covering nearly every inch of the wall. Do not speak to it. I should have left, but it was too late. The elevator that shouldn't exist. I was given a tour of McMurdo, but it felt more like a scripted play. The guides showed me the labs, the storage areas, the research stations, but never the lower levels. I asked about them. The guide just smiled. There are no lower levels. That was a lie. That night, when I couldn't sleep, I decided to wander. McMurdo was silent at night. Too silent. No wind, no movement, just this constant hum from somewhere deep beneath the floor, like the sound of an engine running underground. I followed it, and that's how I found the elevator. It was at the end of a hallway, behind a door marked storage. But it wasn't a storage room. It was an old metal elevator with no buttons, just a single keyhole. And right next to it, scratched into the metal panel, were 3 words: "Don't go down." I should have listened. Instead, I waited, watched. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the elevator doors opened. No one was inside. It was empty. The lights flickered once. Then the buttons appeared. Just one. B7. 7 floors underground. I don't know what took over me, but before I could stop myself, I stepped inside. B7, the forgotten level. The ride down felt endless. The numbers flickered erratically. B1, B3, B5, before finally stopping at B7. When the doors opened, the air changed. It was humid. Wrong. The temperature down here was warmer than the surface, but there was this smell, like rotten meat and something metallic. I stepped out, and my foot squelched. The floor was wet. I looked down. It wasn't water. It was blood. A thin layer of it covered the entire floor, stretching into the darkness. The lights overhead were dim and flickering, casting long, jerky shadows along the corridor. And then I heard it. A whispering, not in my head, not over an intercom, from the walls. I turned my flashlight on and nearly screamed. The walls weren't walls. They were glass. And behind that glass were people. Or things that used to be people. The experiments. They were floating in tanks, suspended in thick, dark liquid. Some were missing limbs. Some had elongated faces, too many teeth. Their eyes were open, watching me, but their mouths moved as if they were speaking. The whispering got louder. I stepped closer to one of the tanks. A woman was inside, her skin gray, her veins black and spreading like spiderwebs. She twitched violently, her fingers scratching at the glass. I leaned in, her mouth opened wide, too wide, her jaw unhinged, stretching down to her chest. And then she spoke. "Run!" The lights cut out. The whispering turned to screaming. And behind me, in the darkness, I heard something step onto the wet floor. Something big. Something breathing. I ran. I don't know how I made it back to the elevator, but when the doors finally slammed shut, I heard it throw itself against the metal. A deep, guttural sound rumbled from the other side. Not human, not animal. Something in between. Something they had created. The elevator shot up so fast, I nearly collapsed. When the doors opened again, I was back at McMurdo, like nothing had happened. But I knew. I knew that wasn't just a research station. I knew that whatever was down there wasn't supposed to exist. And I knew that they knew I had seen it. Because when I got back to my room, my roommate was waiting for me. I had never seen him before, but he was sitting on the top bunk, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. And when he smiled, I saw it. His teeth were wrong. Too sharp. Too many. And in the darkness, his voice came out in a slow, deliberate whisper. "You shouldn't have gone down there." I swear I stopped breathing. The moment he spoke, if you can even call that thing's voice speaking, every muscle in my body locked up. My lungs forgot how to work. My brain refused to process what I was looking at, because my roommate wasn't human. Not anymore. He just sat there on the top bunk, legs dangling over the side, like a kid waiting for story time. The light in our room was dim, flickering every few seconds, but I could still see his face. And that's what shattered every last piece of my sanity. His skin was too tight, stretched over his skull like it wasn't made for him. His mouth was too wide, lips cracked and peeling, but stretched into a grin so unnatural that it made my stomach churn. And his eyes, God, his eyes, they weren't eyes at all. They were just black, not like someone with dark irises. No, these were empty. No light, no reflection, just endless, oily pits staring straight through me. I was trapped, frozen, and then he moved. The smiling thing. His neck snapped at a horrifying angle as he tilted his head, like a broken puppet. "You shouldn't have gone down there," he whispered again, but this time, the voice changed. It wasn't just one voice, it was many, layered over each other, like 100 people speaking in perfect sync, their tones overlapping and distorting. Some voices sounded young, others ancient. Some were laughing, some were sobbing, but underneath it all was a wet, gurgling sound, like something was moving inside him, just beneath the skin. Then he dropped. 1 second, he was sitting on the bed. The next, he was crawling down the side of the bunk like a spider, arms and legs bending at angles that no human should ever move. The way his fingers curled against the metal frame made this horrible scraping noise, like nails on a chalkboard. I finally found my breath and took a step back. My heel hit the door. There was nowhere to go. He reached the floor in a slow, deliberate motion and stood up. But it was wrong. Like his bones were shifting into place after the fact. Like he wasn't used to walking upright. Then he took a step toward me, and I ran the endless hallway. I threw the door open and sprinted into the hallway, nearly slipping on the cold metal floor. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I was going to pass out. I didn't look back, didn't want to see if he was following, but I could hear it, the sound of bare feet slapping against the floor. Too many feet. It echoed through the hall as I ran, getting louder, like there were more of them coming. I turned a corner, then another, but the hallway just kept going. McMurdo wasn't that big. I should have hit a dead end. But the corridor just stretched on forever. The walls were changing too. At first, they were just the plain steel I'd seen before. But after the third turn, they started to rot. Rust spread across the metal like veins. The fluorescent lights above me flickered red, buzzing like dying insects. And then the walls started breathing. They expanded and contracted, as if the whole station was a living thing, a lung. The air was thick, hot, and then the whispers came back, not from behind me, from inside the walls. They were chanting something, a language I didn't understand. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices poured into my skull, growing louder, pressing against my brain like a drill burrowing into my mind. I stumbled, nearly falling to my knees. And then I saw it. The mirror. The thing that wore my face. It was just standing there at the end of the hallway. A massive, wall-sized mirror where there shouldn't have been one. And inside it, I saw myself. But not really. The reflection was off. The me in the mirror was standing still, even though I was gasping for breath, hunched over. His expression was blank, empty. His eyes were black voids. Then his lips curled into a slow, deliberate smile, and he stepped out. I stumbled backward as my reflection crawled out of the mirror. its body stretching unnaturally as it pulled itself free from the glass. It was grinning at me. Its mouth was too wide, too many teeth. And then it whispered, "You are not supposed to be here." It lunged. The fall. I don't remember what happened next. 1 second, the thing that wore my face was on top of me, pinning me to the floor. Its hands were too strong, its fingers digging into my skin. Then I was falling. The floor had disappeared. I was plunging downward into an endless, suffocating darkness. My stomach lurched. The air was ripped from my lungs. My arms flailed, trying to grab onto anything, but there was nothing, just the void. And the whole time, I could hear the voices, laughing, screaming, whispering my name. Then I hit the ground, the hidden prison. I woke up in a cell. The walls were stone. The air was wet and cold. I could hear dripping water somewhere in the distance. I tried to move, but my body felt weak, like I had been drugged. I wasn't alone. Something was in the corner, hunched over, breathing, slow, wet. And then it stood up. I barely had time to react before it lunged. But when it stepped into the light, I saw its face, and my blood ran cold. It was my roommate, or at least, what was left of him. His skin was peeling away, revealing something black and writhing underneath. His mouth was open, too wide, his jaw unhinged, like a snake about to swallow its prey. And then, his voice came out, layered and distorted, like 100 people speaking at once. "Welcome back." And that's when I realized this wasn't a dream. This wasn't some nightmare I could wake up from. I was in hell, and I was never getting out. I don't know how long I was unconscious before I woke up in the cell. It was a small, damp room, the walls made of rough black stone that looked ancient, like it had been built long before McMurdo Station had ever existed. There was no bed, no blankets, just the cold floor beneath me, and the sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. And then there was the breathing, slow, deep, wrong. At first, I thought it was my own, but then I felt it, a presence. Something was in here with me. I turned my head, every muscle in my body screaming in protest, and that's when I saw it. My roommate, or at least, what used to be my roommate. He was standing in the corner, hunched over, his back turned to me. His body twitched in slow, unnatural spasms, like something was moving beneath his skin, shifting and writhing as if it was trying to get out. I couldn't see his face, but I could hear him. He was whispering, a sound like 1,000 voices overlapping, speaking in a language that made my ears ring and my skin feel like it was shrinking around my bones. And then he stopped. The room went silent, and I realized he was listening to me, the thing wearing his skin. I held my breath, didn't move, didn't even blink. The air was so thick, it felt like I was drowning in it. Then slowly, so slowly, it made my stomach twist into knots. He turned his head, not his body, just his head, way too far, like an owl, but more unnatural, more broken. And when I saw his face, I thought my heart was going to stop. His skin was peeling away, strips of it hanging from his jaw, like wet, rotten paper. But underneath, there was nothing. No skull, no muscle, just an endless, gaping void where his features should have been. And in that void, I saw movement. Something was inside him. Something was crawling beneath his flesh, wearing him like a suit. Then, with a sound like cracking bone, his mouth stretched open, wider than humanly possible, too wide. and in that deep, distorted voice that sounded like a choir of the dead, he said, "You are not supposed to be here." Then he charged me. The escape. That wasn't an escape. I didn't think. Didn't even breathe. I just moved. I threw myself backward just as his hand slammed down where my head had been, hitting the stone floor with a wet, cracking sound. The walls of the cell shook. The air rippled like reality itself was trying to fold in on itself. I scrambled toward the back of the room, my hand sliding against the damp stone. There was no way out, no windows, no doors. But then I saw it. A hole. A jagged, uneven gash in the wall, barely big enough for me to squeeze through. I didn't think about what was on the other side. I just crawled. The tunnel. The passage was narrow, suffocating, barely giving me enough space to pull myself forward. The walls were made of the same black stone, but they were slick, not with water, but with something thicker, something warm. I tried not to think about it, tried not to think about the whispering that was following me, because my roommate thing wasn't far behind. I could hear him crawling after me, faster than he should have been able to move. His breathing was right behind my head, wet and hungry, like a starving animal about to sink its teeth into my skull. And then something grabbed my ankle. I screamed, kicked as hard as I could. My foot connected with something soft and wet, and there was a sound like a sack of meat bursting open. I didn't stop. I just kept going, kept crawling, until I fell. The room of bodies. And I landed hard on something soft. At first, I thought it was dirt, but when I looked down, I saw faces. I had landed on a pile of bodies, hundreds of them, all tangled together in a horrible writhing mass, their flesh fused together like melted wax. Some of them were still moving, mouths opening and closing, silent screams frozen on their lips, eyes that were milky white, rolling wildly in their sockets, hands twitching, fingers clawing at nothing. And then one of them grabbed my wrist. I tried to pull away, but its grip was like iron. Then its lips moved, and in a voice that was barely a whisper, it choked out, "Help me." Then the body started pulling me under. The hands that dragged me down. I thrashed, kicked, screamed, but the more I fought, the deeper I sank. The bodies wrapped around me, pulling me into that endless writhing mass. Their skin was cold and slick, their fingers like hooks digging into my flesh, and the whole time they were whispering, "Join us. Stay. Help us." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then something else grabbed me. A hand, massive, strong, human. It yanked me upward, ripping me out of the sea of bodies, dragging me onto solid ground. I gasped for air, looked up, and saw a man. He was wearing a military uniform, but it was old, faded, torn, covered in blood. His face was pale, eyes sunken and hollow, like he hadn't slept in years. And in a voice that was shaking, he whispered, "You don't have much time. They're coming." Then he pointed to a door, a single rusted metal door standing at the far end of the room, and on it, scrawled in something dark and dripping, was a single word, "Exit." But was it really an exit? I had no choice. I ran for it. The moment my fingers touched the handle, the whispering stopped. The bodies froze. And then the lights went out. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me was the sound of screaming, not from the bodies, not from my roommate thing, but from something else, something far, far worse. And then the door opened, and I stepped through, into something that wasn't McMurdo anymore, something that wasn't even Earth. The second I stepped through the door, I knew I had made a mistake. This wasn't an exit. This wasn't even reality. The first thing that hit me was the air. It was thick, wrong. It crawled into my lungs like liquid, choking me with something that smelled like rust and rotten meat. It was humid, too humid for Antarctica. And then the gravity itself felt off, like I wasn't supposed to be standing here, like this place was rejecting me. I took a step forward, and my foot sank into something soft. I looked down. The ground was flesh, not rock, not metal, not ice. Skin, pale, veiny skin. It pulsed beneath me, squirming, like whatever I was standing on was still alive. And then I saw them, the mountains. But they weren't mountains. They were bodies, towering monolithic corpses, fused together in impossible shapes. Some were upside down, their faces locked in silent screams. Some were stretched into spirals, their rib cages broken open like they had been peeled apart from the inside. They weren't dead. Their eyes moved. They saw me. And then, from behind me, a sound, a wet, gurgling whisper. "You are not supposed to be here." I turned, and I saw it. The thing that had been following me. The shape that watched me. It wasn't my roommate anymore. It wasn't even human. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs elongated, stretched like they had been pulled apart and stitched back together. Its skin was translucent, veins black and pulsing beneath the surface, shifting like worms crawling just beneath its flesh. But its face, it had my face, twisted, distorted, smiling, and then it spoke, not with its mouth, with mine. "Why did you come here?" The voice came from inside my head, echoing, rattling my skull like a bell. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The ground quivered beneath me. The mountains of fused bodies groaned, their mouths opening and closing, whispering in that same language I had heard in the tunnels. I tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The sky, if you could even call it that, was a swirling black void, shifting with shapes that I couldn't comprehend. Things moved up there, huge things, long things, things that were watching, waiting, and then the ground split open. A massive hole tore itself into the flesh beneath my feet, revealing something far below, something moving, something breathing, something waiting. A hand, if it was even a hand, began to rise from the pit. Fingers too long, too many joints. The skin stretched so thin, I could see the bones beneath. It was reaching for me, and I knew, if it touched me, I would never leave. I would be part of this place, just like them, just like all the others who had come before me. And then, in my head, the thing with my face whispered one last time, "Time does not work here. You have always been here." And that's when I remembered. This wasn't my first time in this place. I had been here before, and I had never left. The endless cycle. The memories hit me like a flood. Flashes of other versions of myself. Trapped here. Running. Hiding. Being hunted. Failing. I had died here before. Over and over and over again. Each time I'd woken up in McMurdo Station. Each time I'd gone too deep. Each time I'd opened the door. And now I was right back where I started. The thing with my face reached out, and I screamed, waking up in hell. I bolted upright, gasping, my lungs burning. I was back in the McMurdo Station bunker, back in my room, back in my bed, like nothing had ever happened. But when I looked down, my hands were covered in blood. The walls were still scratched with the same words, "Do not speak to it." And in the corner of the room, My roommate was sitting there, watching me, smiling, waiting. And that's when I knew. It wasn't over. It was never going to be over, because I had been here before, and I was going to be here forever. Final log, the last thing I will ever write. If you're reading this, don't come looking for me. Don't try to find McMurdo's hidden levels. Don't go down the elevator. And most importantly, don't open the door, because if you do, you won't escape. You won't be rescued. You'll just wake up in your bed like nothing ever happened. But you'll know. You'll always know. Because once you've seen it, it sees you too. And it never forgets. They always told me to never look at the parade that went through my hometown. I found the horrifying reason on the dark web why. Alright, so I know this is gonna sound weird, but hear me out. You ever have one of those memories from childhood that you just accepted as normal, but looking back, you realize how completely messed up it actually was? Yeah, that's what this is for me. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, not the cute, picturesque kind, with cobblestone streets and historic buildings. Nah, this was the kind of town that had $3 generals, one rundown McDonald's, and absolutely nothing to do past 8 p.m. unless you wanted to get arrested. It was one of those places where people either never leave or disappear without a trace. But the weirdest thing about my town was the parade. It happened once a year, always on the same day, October 29th, not on Halloween, not on a weekend, just October 29th, no matter what day of the week it landed on. And nobody, and I mean nobody, was allowed to watch it. That was the rule. Every year, my parents would make sure all the windows were covered, the doors were locked, and the TV was turned up loud enough to drown out the noise. If you were outside when the parade started, you weren't coming back inside. Not ever. The adults never talked about why. They just knew. I remember asking my mom about it when I was like 7. What happens if we watch it? She didn't even look at me, just kept washing dishes and said, "People who watch don't come back." That was it. I should have been scared, right? But when you grow up with something, it just feels normal. Every October 29th, I'd sit in my room playing whatever game was popular at the time, Minecraft, Call of Duty, GTA 4, and pretend like there wasn't some eerie silent procession happening just outside. But here's where it gets even weirder. There were never any decorations, no flyers, no social media posts, no one prepared for it. You'd just wake up on the 29th and know it was happening. The air felt different, heavier, and by the time the sun started to set, you could hear it. The sound of drums, slow, methodical, like a heartbeat echoing through the streets. I always imagined it looked like one of those big city parades, floats, marching bands, maybe some creepy mascots. But the thing is, I never saw it, not once, and neither did anyone else. At least that's what I thought, until last year. That's when I learned the truth. And trust me when I say, I wish I never had. Alright, I need you to understand something before I continue. There are things in this world, things that exist in the cracks, in the spaces between what we call reality, that we were never meant to see. Things that operate in the background, like a program running silently on your computer, waiting for the exact wrong moment to execute. And I was stupid enough to look. I don't remember exactly when my curiosity turned into an obsession. Maybe it was when I moved out for college and realized I was finally alone, free from my parents' rules. Maybe it was after a few drinks one night, when my roommates and I started sharing our weirdest childhood memories, and I casually mentioned the parade. Whatever the reason, I started digging. At first, I found nothing. No mentions of it online, no historical records, no town archives that acknowledged it even existed. It was like my entire hometown had collectively agreed to erase it. That should have been my first clue to stop looking, but I didn't. And eventually, I found something, or rather, someone found me. It happened on a random Tuesday night. I was in bed, half asleep, scrolling through Reddit, when my laptop screen glitched. Just a quick flicker, like static on an old TV. Then a message popped up in a chat window. I swear I didn't have open. Unknown. You're looking for the parade, aren't you? I sat up so fast, I nearly knocked my laptop home off my bed. I hesitated for a second before typing back. Me. Who is this? No response. I was about to close the window when another message came through. Unknown. You won't find it on Google. You won't find it in any books. But there is a place where you can see it, if you really want to know. Another message popped up, this time with a link. Now, if I had even half a brain, I would have noped the hell out right then and there. But I was too far gone. My entire life, I'd been told never to look, and now I had the chance. So, like an idiot, I clicked the link, and that's when I entered the dark web. I had messed around with the dark web before, just out of curiosity. I wasn't into any of the creepy illegal stuff, but I knew enough to recognize what I was looking at. The site had no name, just a black screen with a single video player in the center. There was no play button, no controls, just a timestamp, counting down from 00500. 5 minutes. I waited, heart pounding, watching as the numbers ticked down. The moment it hit 0000, the screen changed. A live stream. And the first thing I saw was my hometown. The feed was grainy, like an old VHS tape, but I recognized the streets, the buildings, the flickering streetlights. And then, slowly, the camera panned to the parade. I think my brain tried to make sense of it at first, to fit it into something normal. The figures moving in perfect unison, the rhythmic pounding of the drums, the flickering torches lining the streets. But the longer I watched, the more I realized how wrong it was. The people in the parade weren't marching. They were shuffling. Their heads hung limp, their limbs moving in unnatural, jerky motions, like puppets on invisible strings. And their faces, Jesus Christ, their faces. Their skin was stretched tight over their skulls, their eyes black, sunken pits. Some of them had no eyes at all, just gaping, empty sockets leaking something thick and dark down their cheeks. Their mouths hung open in silent screams. And then I saw him. At the very front of the parade, leading the procession, was a tall, skeletal figure wrapped in what looked like decayed flesh. His face was covered by a mask, a grotesque, smiling thing that looked like it had been carved from bone. He wasn't walking, he was floating, moving effortlessly above the ground, his long spindly fingers twitching in the air, as if he was pulling invisible strings. And that's when I realized he was controlling them. Every single person in that parade, every shambling, lifeless husk. They weren't marching. They weren't even alive. They were being puppeteered. And then the camera shifted again. It zoomed in onto a single house, my parents' house, and there, standing in the window, was me. Not past me, not some old recording. It was me, right now, sitting in my dorm room, watching the screen with wide, unblinking eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then, as I stared at the screen, watching myself watch them, something in the parade turned its head. One of the puppeted figures, a woman with half her face missing, her jaw hanging loose, snapped her neck towards the camera, towards me. And then, for the first time, I heard a sound, a whisper, not from the video, not from my laptop, from inside my room. You looked. I need you to understand something. When I heard that whisper, when I felt the breath of something that wasn't there graze the back of my neck, I didn't just feel fear. I felt my sanity snap. You ever been so scared that your body doesn't even react? Like no fight or flight, no screams, no sudden burst of adrenaline, just paralysis, just raw, soul-crushing terror that presses down on you so hard that your body forgets how to move. That's what it was like. I sat there frozen, the words still echoing in my ears. You looked. My laptop screen was still on. The video still played. And on the screen, on that cursed, impossible live stream, something in the parade was still staring at me. But that's not even the worst part. It smiled. Its jaw hung loose, like the tendons had been snapped, the skin barely holding it in place. And yet, it smiled. A slow, unnatural curling of its blackened lips, revealing rotting gums and teeth that looked too sharp to belong to any human. And then, it took a step forward, not in the parade, not in my town, in my dorm room. The second its foot touched my carpet, every instinct in my body screamed. My limbs finally unlocked, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I slammed my laptop shut. The second the screen went black, the room was silent again. I sat there for what felt like hours, heart hammering, ears straining for any sound, any shift in the darkness. I could still feel the weight of something watching me, like a pressure in the back of my skull, but nothing moved, nothing whispered, nothing reached for me. Eventually I forced myself to stand. My legs felt like jelly, and my stomach churned like I was about to puke. I staggered to the bathroom, flipped on the light, and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked like hell, pale, eyes bloodshot, sweat dripping down my face. But I was alive. And then, I saw it. Something wrong with my reflection. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. I leaned in closer, my breath fogging up the glass. My reflection did the same, moved the same way I did, blinked when I blinked. But something wasn't right. I wiped a shaking hand across the mirror, clearing the fog. And that's when I saw it. My reflection wasn't smiling, but its teeth were. A row of sharp, glistening, inhuman teeth, grinning from inside my own mouth. I stumbled back so fast, I nearly cracked my skull against the wall. My hand flew to my lips, fingers trembling as I felt along my gums. Normal. Everything was normal. I looked again, saw nothing. No smile, no teeth, just my own terrified face staring back at me. I told myself I was imagining it, that the stress, the lack of sleep, the pure fucking terror of what just happened had fried my brain. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something had changed, and I would never be normal again. That night, I barely slept. I kept my laptop shut, buried it under a pile of clothes, like that would somehow keep it from showing me things. I thought about shutting it off. thought about unplugging the router, smashing the damn thing to pieces, but some part of me knew it wouldn't matter, because whatever I had seen, whatever had seen me, wasn't inside my laptop. It was inside me. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating. A text from my mom. Mom, hey sweetheart, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a few days. I stared at the screen. Something about the message felt off. Maybe it was the way it was worded. My mom never texted like that. She always said hi first. She used emojis. This question mark. This was too formal, too direct. My stomach twisted. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. And then, another text. Mom, you didn't look, did you? My blood ran ice cold. I nearly dropped my phone. My breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. This wasn't my mom. My hands were shaking as I typed out a response. Me. Who is this? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Then, finally, Mom, it's too late now. I don't know why, but I threw my phone across the room. It hit the wall, landed face down on the floor. My entire body was shaking. My vision blurred at the edges, my mind screaming at me that this wasn't real, that this wasn't happening. And then, knock, knock, knock. Someone was at my door. I couldn't move. The knocks came again, louder, more insistent. Then a voice. Hey man, you good? Open up. My roommate, Tyler. I almost cried with relief. My legs felt like lead as I staggered toward the door. My hand hovered over the doorknob, and then I froze. Because suddenly, I remembered something. Tyler wasn't home. He had gone to visit his parents for the weekend. He had told me before he left. I had watched him pack his bags. I had watched him walk out the door. So who the fuck was standing outside my room? I took a step back. My breath hitched in my throat. Then, the doorknob started turning. Slowly, deliberately, like whoever was on the other side already knew they didn't need permission to come in. Click. The door unlocked. I bolted. I didn't care where I was going. I just knew I had to get the fuck out of there. I grabbed my keys, yanked open the window, and climbed out onto the fire escape. My bare feet burned against the cold metal as I scrambled down, taking the steps 2 at a time. When I hit the pavement, I didn't look back. I just ran until my lungs felt like they were going to explode. Ran until my vision blurred. Ran until I collapsed in the alley behind a 24-hour McDonald's, my entire body trembling as I gasped for air. And then, my phone vibrated. I didn't want to look. I really didn't want to look. But I did. And when I saw the notification, my stomach dropped. A new message. No name. No number. Just 3 words. The parade's coming. I sat there, crouched behind a dumpster in the back alley of that 24-hour McDonald's, my body trembling so hard it felt like my bones were rattling against my skin. The world around me felt wrong, like I was somehow stuck between being awake and trapped in a nightmare I couldn't crawl out of. But the message on my phone was real. The parade's coming, and I knew, deep in my gut, in the part of my brain that hadn't stopped screaming since I clicked that cursed link, that whoever sent it wasn't lying. The parade was coming, and it was coming for me. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at my phone screen like it might burn a hole straight through my palm. Minutes, hours, time felt different, heavy, like I was sinking into it, being pulled into some place I was never supposed to go. But then, something pulled me back. The sound of laughter, not just any laughter, children's laughter. I stiffened, gripping my phone so tight my knuckles turned white. Slowly, I lifted my head and peeked around the dumpster. The street was empty. The McDonald's parking lot, usually packed with half-drunk college students and sketchy guys who smelled like cheap cologne and worse decisions, was completely abandoned. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows across the cracked pavement. And then I saw them. Across the street, standing perfectly still beneath a broken streetlight, were 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. They weren't dressed for the weather. It was late October, cold enough to see my breath in the air, but they stood there in thin, tattered clothes. Their skin was too pale, almost bluish under the artificial light, and they were smiling. Not normal kid smiles, not the awkward, toothy grins you see in school photos. These were too wide, too stretched, like someone had carved their mouths open just a little too much. My stomach turned. Every single instinct in my body told me to run. But then the girl took a step forward. Her head tilted slightly, the way a dog might when it hears a strange noise. And then she said something. I couldn't hear her. The words didn't make a sound, but I felt them, like cold fingers digging into my brain. You looked. My breath caught my throat. Then, all 3 of them lurched forward at once. I didn't even think. My body moved on its own, shoving myself away from the dumpster and sprinting towards the McDonald's entrance, like my life depended on it, because I knew it did. I grabbed the door handle and yanked. Locked. Panic surged through me. My heart was hammering against my ribs, my throat burning from the cold air. I slammed my fist against the glass. Let me in, please. Inside, the McDonald's was normal. A bored-looking employee stood behind the counter, scrolling on his phone. A couple sat in a booth, dipping their fries in ketchup, completely oblivious to the fact that something horribly, horribly wrong was happening just outside. And then, the girl's voice came again. They can't see us. I turned, and my stomach nearly dropped out of my body. They were right there, not across the street anymore. Right. Fucking. There. Inches from me. Their faces were wrong up close. Skin stretched too tight over their skulls. Lips split at the edges like they had been forced to smile for too long. Their teeth were rotting, jagged, like something had tried to chew through solid bone. I stumbled backward, my back slamming against the locked door. And then, the girl reached up and tapped the glass. The second her fingers touched it, I felt it, a static charge in the air. The lights inside flickered violently, casting twisted, jittering shadows across the walls. The McDonald's employees didn't react. The couple didn't look up from their fries. Like I wasn't even there. Like I was already somewhere else. You looked, the girl whispered again, her head twitching to the side with a sickening crack. Now you march. And then, the first drum beat sounded. You ever hear something so loud, so deep, that it vibrates in your bones? That's what it felt like. Like the sound wasn't just hitting my ears, it was inside me. The air grew thick, the temperature dropped, my breath curled in front of my face, like fog. And then, the parade began. They came from everywhere, out of the shadows, from behind buildings, stepping out of places that shouldn't exist. Shambling figures, grotesque and broken, their bodies twisted in ways that no human body should ever bend. Some of them were rotting, flesh hanging in strips from their bones. Others looked fresh, like they had only just joined. and they all marched. The drums pounded, and I realized something. They weren't marching away from town. They were marching toward my house, toward my parents. I took off running. I didn't know if it would help, if I could do anything to stop this, but I couldn't just sit there and wait to be dragged along. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they were about to snap in half. The parade kept moving, slow but unstoppable, the drum beats growing louder, and then I saw my house. The windows were dark, the curtains were drawn, just like every year, just like they always knew. I stumbled up the porch steps, pounded on the door. "Mom! Dad! Open the door!" Silence. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the lock clicked, the door swung open, and standing there was my mother. But she wasn't smiling. Her face was blank, her eyes dull and wrong. Behind her, my father stood in the shadows, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, his jaw unhinged slightly, as if he was waiting to speak. Then, in perfect unison, they whispered, "You should have never looked." And behind them, inside the house, the parade was already waiting for me. My mother's face was empty, not emotionless, empty, like something had scooped out whatever made her her and left behind a hollow shell wearing her skin. And behind her, my father twitched. His head jerked sharply to one side, like his neck had snapped, but he somehow just kept moving. His lips trembled, then split open too wide, peeling back until I could see his gums, his teeth, the black rot festering between them. He took a step forward. So did the parade. I don't remember making the decision to run. My body just did it. Instinct kicked in, pure terror overriding everything else. I turned. I sprinted off that porch so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The air was thick, pressing against me, like I was trying to run through water, but I forced myself forward. I heard them behind me. Not footsteps, not breathing, something else. The sound of limbs dragging against pavement, of joints popping, cracking, resetting, of something wet slapping against the ground in uneven, impossible movements. The parade was chasing me. I ran down the middle of the street. The town was wrong now. The houses stretching tall and warped, their windows twisting into wide, black holes. The streetlights flickered erratically, casting moving shadows where nothing should be. And the parade? It was everywhere. They weren't just behind me anymore. They were in front of me, too. I skidded to a stop, so fast my shoes nearly ripped apart. My chest heaved, my vision swimming from pure exhaustion, from sheer fucking terror. And then I saw him, the leader of the parade, the tall skeletal figure with the bone-white mask. He was standing in the center of the road, floating just above the pavement. His elongated fingers twitched in the air, like a puppeteer adjusting his strings. And then he tilted his head, like he was watching me, studying me. Then, without moving his lips, I heard his voice. "You march now." The drum beats hit all at once, so loud I felt my skull vibrate, my bones crack, and my body moved. Not because I wanted it to, not because I was running, because he was pulling me. I don't know how long I walked. Seconds, minutes, hours. Time lost all meaning. The parade moved forward, and I moved with it. My muscles screamed. My skin burned like I was walking straight into an open fire. I tried to stop, tried to fight, but my legs kept moving. My arms swung in time with the others. My body wasn't mine anymore. The town blurred past us. The sky blackened. The stars overhead stretched into streaks of white. We weren't just marching through town. We were leaving it, going somewhere else. And the worst part, I wasn't alone. I started recognizing faces in the parade. People I knew. People who had disappeared. A boy from my high school, Adam Parker, vanished when he was 16. A whole town-wide search party never found a single trace of him. My old science teacher, Mrs. Dyer. Everyone said she quit and moved away, but her empty, rotting eyes told me otherwise. And then I saw Tyler, my roommate. His head bobbed unnaturally, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream, his skin gray and peeling. He'd never left for the weekend. He had marched last year. My stomach lurched, my lungs tightened, and then I saw my mother, her face still empty, her body jerking like a broken marionette. But her eyes, for 1 second, one fleeting, impossible second, they flickered back to normal. She saw me, and she screamed, but no sound came out. Her mouth moved frantically, her limbs spasming like she was fighting something. And then she broke free. She lunged for me, her fingers digging into my arm so hard I thought she'd snap the bone. And suddenly, I could move again. Run! Her voice exploded into my skull like a bomb going off. And I did. I turned and ran like my life depended on it. Because it fucking did. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. My legs burned, my vision blurred, but I didn't stop. The leader screamed, a sound so deep, so hollow, it made my eardrums feel like they were going to shatter. I could feel the air around me shift, feel something pulling me back. But then, I saw it. A single house. Not twisted, not warped, just a normal fucking house. And the door was open. I ran straight for it, feeling something clawing at my ankles, at my back, trying to drag me back into the parade. And the moment I crossed the threshold, everything went black. I woke up in my dorm, lying in bed, soaked in sweat, my body aching like I'd been walking for weeks. The clock on my nightstand read 11:59 p.m., October 28th, the day before the parade, like none of it had happened, like I had never seen it, but I knew better. And when my phone vibrated, I nearly screamed. A text. Unknown number. You can't run forever. My hands shook as I typed back. Me. What do you want? A long pause. Then, unknown. Number. You looked. Unknown number. You march next year. I dropped the phone. It clattered against the floor, the screen flickering. I couldn't breathe, because I knew they were right. I had escaped once, but no one gets away twice. And next, October 29th, I'll be in the parade. I was messing with the real anonymous hacker group on the dark web. They were leaving me strange notes around my house. I finally understand the hidden meaning behind it. Alright, so before I even get into this, let me just say, don't mess with people on the dark web. Seriously, I thought it was all just stories, internet myths, the kind of stuff YouTubers make clickbait videos about. But trust me, it's real. And if you piss off the wrong people, they won't just come after your data or your bank account. They'll come after you. So, this all started a few months ago when my friend Jason and I were just screwing around on a Discord call. We both work in IT. Nothing too crazy, just freelance gigs, fixing people's computers, dealing with dumb boomers who think their iPhones have viruses, that kind of thing. But we also had this weird hobby of digging around in places we shouldn't. The deep web, data leaks, hacking forums, just browsing, nothing serious. It was mostly for fun. One night, Jason sent me a link. Dude, you have to see this. I clicked, expecting some cringy conspiracy theory post, but it was a forum I'd never heard of. The URL was a mess of random numbers and letters, and the design looked old, like early 2000s old. Basic HTML, white text on a black background, no images, just a long thread of anonymous users posting in broken English about some operation. I skimmed through the posts. OPSEC is key. Do not reply to unknown. Retribution for leak is set. Remain silent. He saw. Remove him. It was weird, but I figured it was just some LARPing hacker wannabes. You see this kind of stuff all the time. Edgy kids pretending they're in some secret organization, trying to sound intimidating. I was about to close it when Jason said, "Check this out." He sent another link. This one led to a live chat room. And here's where I made the dumbest decision of my life. I typed, "Yo, y'all really anonymous? Where the Guy Fawkes masks at?" I was just joking, but within seconds, the chat froze. Like everyone just stopped talking at once. And then, one single message popped up. "Leave." Jason was dying laughing. "Dude, you scared him off." But then my laptop screen went black for like 5 seconds, and when it came back, my webcam light was on. I slammed the lid shut so fast, I nearly broke it. "Dude, what the hell?" Jason stopped laughing. "Wait, did they just..." And then his screen went black too. Now, at this point, we should have just dropped it. But no, we were idiots. Jason, being the reckless dumbass he is, decided to go back in. He pulled up a VPN, changed his IP, and started trolling. He spammed memes, fake anonymous quotes, that stupid "We Are Legion" copy pasta. And for like 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then we got disconnected. Again. Only this time, my phone vibrated. A notification from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a picture of me, sitting at my desk, taken from my webcam. I stopped breathing. I looked at Jason. He was already checking his phone. His face went pale. They sent me a picture of my house. We both just sat there, staring at our screens, too freaked out to even speak. And then, another text came in. "Stop." No threats, no explanation. Just stop. Jason muttered, "Okay, yeah, nope." He slammed his laptop shut, unplugged his webcam, and straight up yeeted his phone across the room. "We're done. I'm wiping my drive." I did the same. Factory reset everything, even my router. I didn't sleep that night. Every little noise made me jump. I felt like someone was watching. But after a few days, nothing happened. No more texts. No weird activity on our accounts. It seemed like we got lucky. Like they just wanted to scare us. I told myself it was over. But then, 2 weeks later, I found the first note. "I need you to understand something before I continue. This isn't just some spooky story where a couple of dumbasses get scared and move on with their lives. This wasn't some stupid hacker prank. They knew me. They were watching. And what they did to me, I wouldn't wish on anyone." 2 weeks after the whole dark web incident, I was finally starting to relax. No more weird messages. No sign that anyone had actually been watching me. It was almost easy to believe that Jason and I had just overreacted. And then I found the first note. It was on my car. At first, I thought it was just some flyer or parking ticket. But no, it was a plain white envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. No stamps, no return address, just my name. I don't know why, but I hesitated before opening it. Something about it just felt wrong, like my gut knew before my brain did. Inside was a single piece of paper, typewritten. "We warned you." I stared at it for a long time. My mind immediately went to Jason. Maybe he was screwing with me, trying to drag this joke out. But I knew him. He wasn't the type to go this far. And besides, if he was messing with me, why would he leave it on my car? My apartment building had security cameras. He wouldn't risk getting caught just for a prank. That's when I noticed something else. My driver's side door was unlocked. I never leave my car unlocked. Ever. But when I pulled the handle, it opened right up. Someone had been inside. I checked everything. Glove compartment, back seat, even under the floor mats. Nothing was missing, but nothing was added either. I kept telling myself, maybe I just forgot to lock it. Maybe this was just a coincidence. But I knew it wasn't. Still, I tried to brush it off. Big mistake. The next morning, there was another note. This time, inside my apartment. It was sitting on my kitchen counter when I woke up. My front door was locked. The windows were locked. There was no sign of a break-in, no security footage of anyone entering, but the note was there. You think this is a game? I felt like I was going to throw up. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the paper. They had been inside. While I was sleeping, I tore my apartment apart, looking for cameras, listening devices, anything, but there was nothing. No fingerprints, no footprints, no signs of forced entry. Just that damn note, sitting there like a signature. I called Jason immediately. The second he picked up, I could hear it in his voice. Something was wrong. Dude, he said, I messed up. What do you mean? He didn't answer right away. Then, in the quietest voice I've ever heard from him, he whispered, They were in my house last night. I felt my stomach drop. How do you know? Because they left a note. He took a shaky breath. It said, Stop talking to him. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Jason spoke again, voice almost robotic. I think they want me to cut you off, and I think if I don't, they're gonna do something. At that moment, I realized just how deep we were in. This wasn't just harassment. This wasn't just intimidation. They were controlling us. And then Jason said something that made my blood run cold. I think they were in my room while I was sleeping. My entire body locked up. What? I found the note on my nightstand. His voice broke. I swear to God, I heard breathing last night. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, but... He stopped. I can't do this, man. I'm out. Then he hung up. And just like that, Jason was gone. I tried calling back, texting him, even driving to his place. Nothing. It was like he had just disappeared. I don't even know if he left on his own or if they got to him. But I never saw Jason again. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch, staring at my front door, holding a kitchen knife like it would actually protect me. Every sound, every shadow, sent my heart pounding into my throat. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. A whisper. It came from the other side of my apartment. Faint. Just a breath. I froze. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe. Then I heard it again. Closer. My bedroom. I stood up, gripping the knife so hard my fingers hurt. My apartment was small. Just a one-bedroom with a tiny hallway leading to my room. If someone was in there, I was trapped. I crept forward, every muscle in my body screaming to run. The door was open, just a crack. The light from the hallway barely illuminated the inside. I reached out and pushed the door open. Nothing. My room was empty. But then, my closet. The door was slightly ajar. I stared at it. heart pounding so loud I swore whoever was inside could hear it. Then I saw it. A hand, just barely visible in the darkness, fingers rested against the door frame, not moving, not breathing, just waiting. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember running. But the next thing I knew, I was in my car, speeding through empty streets with no idea where I was going. I just needed to get away. I drove for hours, didn't stop until I saw the golden glow of a 24-hour McDonald's and pulled into the parking lot. I sat there shaking, trying to convince myself I hadn't just seen what I saw. And then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We warned you." I nearly threw my phone out the window. That was 2 weeks ago. I haven't been back to my apartment since. I've been crashing in cheap motels, hopping between Airbnbs, using burner phones and fake names. But it doesn't matter. They always find me. Every night, a new note. No return address. No witnesses. Just a reminder. We warned you. You didn't listen. You can't hide. And the worst one? The one I found taped to my motel mirror this morning. See you soon. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stop this. All I know is I'm not alone. Not anymore. And if you're reading this, if you ever get the urge to mess around on the dark web, don't. Because they're real. And they never, ever let go. There's a pattern to nightmares. You wake up, heart pounding, sweat dripping down your face. But after a few minutes, maybe an hour if it's bad, you shake it off. You tell yourself it wasn't real. You move on. But what happens when the nightmare follows you? When it doesn't let you wake up? I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if I'm already dead. The man in the hallway. After finding that last note, "See you soon," I left the motel in the middle of the night. I didn't pack, didn't even grab my phone charger. I just walked out, got in my car, and drove. I drove until the gaslight came on. I was in the middle of nowhere. A 2-lane road stretching through dead fields with no streetlights, no gas stations, just miles and miles of emptiness. That's when my phone vibrated. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed, don't check it. Don't give them what they want. But I couldn't help it. Another text. No number. Look in your back seat. My vision blurred. My hands locked onto the wheel. I didn't look. I pressed the gas so hard the engine screamed. My eyes burned from not blinking. My breathing shallow and fast. Then, another vibration. You're going the wrong way. The headlights of an oncoming semi lit up my windshield. I swerved just in time. The truck's horn blared so loud my ears rang. I pulled over, hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel. I sat there, gasping, trying to convince myself that was just a coincidence, that they weren't in my back seat, that they didn't somehow know where I was going. But when I looked down at my phone again, there was a new text. We'll see you soon. I didn't move for a long time, but I didn't look back. And maybe that's why I'm still alive. Jason's last message. The next day, I bought a burner phone. My old phone went straight into a dumpster behind a Walmart. I wasn't taking any chances. I tried to tell myself I was starting fresh. No more digital footprint. No more tracking me. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. They weren't just tracking my devices. They were tracking me. That night, I checked into a new motel. Filthy, roach-infested. The kind of place where the front desk guy doesn't even ask for ID. The kind of place where people disappear. I locked the door, blocked the windows, moved the dresser in front of the entrance. taped over every inch of the bathroom mirror. Then I sat on the bed, staring at my new phone, debating whether to call someone, anyone. And that's when I saw it. A notification, new voicemail. No missed call, no number, just a voicemail. I pressed play. At first, it was just static, a faint, crackling hiss, like an old tape recording. Then, a voice. Jason. Except it wasn't really him. His voice was wrong, slow, stretched, warped, like someone had pulled it apart and stitched it back together. Me. It sounded like he was choking, like something was wrapped around his throat. Then another voice, deep, hollow, inhuman. He can't talk to you anymore. Silence. I dropped the phone. My entire body was numb. My brain refused to process it. Jason was gone, and they wanted me to know. The woman in room 209. I left the next morning. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. I was running on pure adrenaline and gas station coffee. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. The highway was empty. The sky was gray, like the sun couldn't quite push through. And then the rain started. Not normal rain. Thick, heavy, the kind that drowns the sound of your own heartbeat. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. I needed to stop. I pulled off at the nearest exit, following a cracked road until I saw the neon glow of a motel sign. Lakeview Inn, one of those old, run-down places that probably hadn't been updated since the 80s. I checked in. The guy at the desk barely looked at me. I paid in cash, grabbed my key, and went up to my room. Room 207. The hallway was dead silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. But then, as I passed room 209, I heard it. A whisper, muffled, like someone was inside. I stopped. My entire body tensed. Then, the doorknob rattled. I backed away slowly. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. The air was thick, pressing against my skin. And then, knock, knock, knock. 3 slow taps, deliberate. I ran. I slammed my door shut and locked it, shoved the dresser against it. My breathing was loud, too loud. I pressed my ear against the wall, trying to hear if whoever was in 209 had followed me. Silence. Then, a single, drawn-out breath, right on the other side of the wall. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, my phone buzzed. A text. "You're in the wrong room." I felt something shift, like the whole world tilted for just a second. I turned, slowly, towards the bathroom. The door was open. I hadn't opened it. Inside, the mirror was gone. Not broken. Gone. Like someone had ripped it right off the wall. And behind it, a hole. Dark. Wide enough for a person to crawl through. Then, from inside the hole, a whisper. Not words, just breathing. Slow. Wet. Wrong. I ran. I didn't grab my things, didn't check out. I just ran. As I reached the parking lot, I glanced up, just for a second, and there, in the window of room 209, a face. No expression, no features, just watching. I peeled out of that parking lot so fast my tires screeched. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up. I still don't know who or what was in that motel. All I know is they sent me there on purpose, and I think if I had stayed, I would have been next. I don't dream anymore. Or maybe I do, but I don't wake up the same. I close my eyes, and when I open them again, things are missing. Time, memories, pieces of myself. I don't know what's real and what's been taken. I don't know how much longer I can run, because they're getting closer, and I think they want more than just to watch. The stranger in the diner. After I left the motel, I drove without stopping for nearly 15 hours. I had no plan, no destination, just a desperate, blind need to put as much distance between myself and whatever the hell was in room 209. At some point, exhaustion took over. I found a diner, a tiny run-down place with flickering neon signs and a half-empty parking lot, a safe place to breathe. I walked inside. The air smelled like burnt coffee and grease. A tired-looking waitress glanced up from behind the counter. "Sit anywhere, hun." I took a booth in the back, facing the door. I needed to see everyone coming in, just in case. A few truckers, an old man reading a newspaper, a couple eating in silence. Nothing suspicious, nothing out of the ordinary. Then the waitress came over. She was in her 50s, short curly hair, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. "What can I get you?" I ordered coffee. Black. I needed to stay awake. She scribbled it down, then hesitated. "You all right, sweetheart?" I must have looked like hell. Dark circles, twitchy hands, probably still shaking from what happened the night before. I forced a nod. She gave me a knowing look, but didn't press. Just walked off. That's when I felt it. That itching sensation at the back of my skull. That heavy, suffocating pressure. I wasn't alone. Someone was watching me. Slowly, I turned my head. There was a man sitting at the counter. Or at least, I think it was a man. His skin was too pale, almost gray, like something preserved. His suit was clean, pressed, too perfect, and his eyes, completely black, not dark brown, not normal, just empty, like staring into something that wasn't human. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at me. A shiver crawled up my spine. Then, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't real. It was the kind of expression someone makes when they've practiced it in the mirror, trying to imitate what being normal looks like. Then slowly, he lifted his hand and waved. I shot out of my seat so fast the table rattled. The waitress turned, startled. "Everything okay?" I pointed at the man, but he was gone. The seat at the counter was empty. The waitress frowned. "Sweetheart, you sure you're all right?" I didn't answer. I just threw down a 20 and bolted. When I reached my car, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. My pulse pounded in my ears. My breath came fast and shallow. Then, my phone buzzed. A text. "He saw you." I don't remember driving away. I don't remember anything except the sheer paralyzing terror sinking into my bones. Because I knew, somehow, that he wasn't gone. And I knew he was waiting for me to sleep. The house, in the woods. At some point, I found a road with no name. It cut through dense woods, the kind where the trees press so close together they swallow the headlights. I don't know why I took it. Maybe I thought I could lose them. Maybe I thought if I went somewhere they couldn't track, I'd be safe. I was wrong. After about 10 miles, the road ended. There was a house, old, abandoned. The windows were boarded up, the front porch sagging, but something about it felt off, like it wasn't really empty, like something inside was waiting. A normal person would have turned around. I didn't. I was too tired, too desperate. I parked behind the house, hidden from the road. I locked the doors, gripped my knife tight, tried to breathe. Then I closed my eyes, just for a second. And when I opened them again, it was dark. My phone was dead. The clock on my dashboard was frozen at 3:33 a.m. And outside, the trees had moved. I swear to God, they were closer. Branches pressed against the windows, twisted, gnarled hands reaching. The night was thick, suffocating, wrong. And then, something knocked. Not on the doors, Not on the windows. On the roof. A slow, deliberate tap. 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 I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then, from above, a whisper. Low. Mocking. Come out. My fingers tightened around the knife. My entire body was ice. The whisper came again, from inside the car, right behind me. I spun, slashed, but nothing was there. The car was empty. Then I saw the note. It was on my passenger seat. Plain white paper, typewritten. You can't run forever. I never put that there. And the worst part, the doors were still locked. The next morning, I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, the sun was rising. The trees were back where they belonged. The house looked normal, like nothing had happened, but the note was still there. And when I started my car, my phone turned on by itself. No passcode, no startup screen, just a video. I pressed play. At first, it was just static. Then, a room, dimly lit, a chair, and in that chair, Jason. His head hung low. His wrists and ankles were tied down. At first, I thought he was dead. Then he lifted his head and started screaming. Not words, just raw, broken agony. Then, the camera moved. Something stepped into frame. A man, dressed in black, face covered. He held something in his hand. A knife. Jason thrashed, sobbing. The man leaned in, whispered something into his ear. Then Jason's eyes snapped open, and he stared directly into the camera. His mouth moved, soundless, like he was trying to tell me something. Then, the screen cut to black. No ending, no explanation, just two words, appearing in white text. You're next. The phone shut off. I dropped it. And then, from somewhere deep in the woods, I heard Jason scream, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a story. This isn't some creepy experience I had that I'll eventually get over. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be writing this. And if you've been reading from the beginning, then you're already involved. I'm sorry, but you can't stop now, because they know you're listening, and once they know your name, they never forget. The last time I saw Jason, I should have driven away. I should have ignored the scream, but I didn't, because for as much as I wanted to believe Jason was already dead, some part of me still needed to know. So I went into the woods. The air was thick, heavy, like the entire forest was watching. I moved carefully, knife clutched tight in my hand. Every step felt like it was dragging me deeper into something I couldn't escape. Then, another scream. Closer this time. I picked up my pace, branches whipping against my face. And then, through the trees, I saw it. A cabin. Old. Rotting. The door slightly ajar, shifting with the wind. The scream had come from inside. I should have turned back. I went in anyway. The second I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air was too still. No dust. No smell of mold. No sound, except for my own heartbeat. The walls were covered in paper. Dozens, no, hundreds of sheets. Each one had the same thing written on it. See you soon. Some were typed. Some were scrawled in blood. I swallowed hard, took another step forward. Then, a voice. Not a scream this time. Just whimpering. I followed the sound, heart pounding. It led me to a door at the back of the cabin. It was slightly open. The whimpering was louder now. I pushed it open and saw Jason. He was sitting on the floor, head tilted, mouth slightly open, eyes wide and glassy, like he was seeing something I couldn't. His hands were on the ground, fingertips bloody and raw, because he had been scratching something into the wood. I looked down. There, carved deep into the floorboards, were 3 words. It's not him. I didn't understand. Then Jason's mouth moved. He whispered, so soft, I almost didn't hear it. Run! And then he screamed. A sharp, raw sound of terror. His body jerked back. His arms twisted at an unnatural angle. His jaw snapped open, and something pulled him into the darkness. I ran. I didn't look back. I burst out of the cabin, barely able to breathe. The trees blurred as I sprinted to my car. My vision tunneled, my ears ringing with Jason's lost scream. And then I heard it. A voice. Not Jason's. Not mine. The same voice from my phone. The deep, hollow thing that had whispered in my ear. You were never supposed to see this. Something moved behind me. I don't know what it was. I didn't turn to look. I just kept running. The highway that didn't exist. I don't remember getting into my car. I don't remember starting the engine. I just remember driving, mile after mile of empty road. No signs, no exits. The sky stayed dark, like I had driven into some place that wasn't real. Then, finally, headlights. A gas station. I pulled in so fast my tires skidded. The place was empty, just one old man behind the counter. He watched as I stumbled inside, breathing hard, covered in Jason's blood. I must have looked insane. Jesus, son, he muttered. You all right? I grabbed my phone. I need to call someone. He hesitated, then nodded. Phone's over there. I rushed to the payphone, hands shaking, slid in a few coins, dialed 911. The line rang. Once. Twice. Then, you shouldn't have called. A deep, familiar voice. Not the operator. My breath caught. The old man behind the counter was watching me. And then, behind him, in the reflection of the glass door, a figure, tall, dressed in black, smiling, watching, waiting. I dropped the phone, ran to my car, sped away without looking back. The final note. That was 2 weeks ago. I don't know where I am anymore. I keep moving, changing locations, never staying in one place for more than a night. But it doesn't matter, because they always find me. Every morning, I wake up to a new note. No matter where I go, no matter what I do, always the same thing. See you soon. They took Jason. They took my home. They took my life. And now, I think they're coming for me. I don't know when. I don't know how. But I can feel it. I can hear them, whispering, laughing, waiting. And if you're still reading this, I'm sorry. Because now they know you too. And once they know your name, they never, ever forget.